Good day, ladies and gentlemen. This is Tuli speaking. I'm going to go through medical tax credits. So they are technically called medical scheme fees tax credits in the legislation, and then there's an additional medical scheme fees tax credit. So Section 6A is your normal fixed rate medical tax credit, and then Section 6B is the additional one which looks at qualifying medical expenses. So this video will just go through the theory, and then there's other videos working through some practical examples. So what are medical tax credits? Here we're just looking at Section 6A. It's a rebate, which means it's something that would reduce your normal tax. You would put it there after you've considered your Section 6 rebates, primary rebates, secondary and tertiary rebates. And then where you are doing the taxable income calculation for a natural person who's actually paid fees to a medical aid, you would then consider Section 6A. Section 6A kicks in if you are dealing with a natural person who's paid fees to the medical aid for themselves as a taxpayer or for a dependent. Then you can allocate, or they can claim, a fixed rate per month for themselves, and for a dependent the rate changes. If it's the actual taxpayer and they are the only member of a medical aid fund, there's a rate that they can claim. For the first dependent, there's a rate that they can claim which is similar to the rate that they can claim for themselves as a taxpayer. And then any other dependent, which would be a second dependent onwards, the rate then changes from that point onwards. The rate is a rate that is per month. So please always remember to check for how many months the taxpayer or the dependents were members of the medical aid scheme for. And it does change annually, year on year. So when you're dealing with the 2021 year of assessment, make sure you use the correct rate. One situation that can arise is you have an employer who's paying the medical aid fees to a medical scheme on behalf of an employee. That would be a fringe benefit in terms of the 7th schedule, and it comes into the employee's gross income in terms of paragraph I, special inclusion paragraph I. So if you have that situation, Section 6A then says we will deem that medical aid contribution to have been made by the employee, which means that the employee can then still claim Section 6A, even though from a cash flow point of view, it's the employer who's paying for the contributions. But because it's coming into the employee's gross income as a fringe benefit, we will deem them to have actually paid for the medical aid contributions, which means they can then claim Section 6A. Section 6B is your additional medical tax credit. So Section 6B will kick in if you are a natural person and as the member of a medical aid scheme or a dependent on a medical aid scheme, you've paid for qualifying medical expenses. This is the difference between Section 6A and 6B. In 6B, either the main member, who's the person paying the contributions, or a dependent can actually claim the rebate, provided the criteria here is that the person who's claiming 6B has then paid qualifying medical expenses, and that is defined in the legislation. The amount of the rebate that you can claim is worked out based on a formula, and you would again apply the same principle of saying if the medical aid contribution is being paid by the employer but it's showing as a fringe benefit for the employee, then we will deem the employee to have paid the contributions to a medical aid, and therefore they would also again qualify for Section 6B. And that's the criteria for Section 6B. We will look at how to work out the actual rebate here when we do the examples. Important definitions: you must know who is a dependent in terms of the legislation. It does start off by saying anyone who's a member of who's a dependent in terms of the medical scheme rules is also a dependent, but there's other people added on top of that. The definition of a child: obviously a minor under the age of 18 would be a child, but there's distinctions made between, are you dealing with someone who's married, are you dealing with someone who's still a student and financially dependent on the parents, are you dealing with somebody who's disabled and also financially dependent on the parents. And you need to know then if you are dealing with a person who's defined as a child or not. If you are dealing with a child, they will automatically then be a dependent. Then you also need to know the definition of qualifying medical expenses, because that is important in determining whether the person can claim a Section 6B rebate. It must be for qualifying medical expenses. Okay, and that's the end of this video. I hope you learned something, and we will then move on to the videos dealing with the practical examples. Thank you.